I never expected that a broken water heater would change my life. But that's exactly what happened when my new neighbor knocked on my door. Life has a funny way of rerouting you, of taking the predictable, comfortable path you've laid for yourself and flooding it, forcing you to look for higher ground. Sometimes, that higher ground is a person. My name is Miles, and before all this, my world was a small, quiet one, contained mostly within the four walls of my one-bedroom apartment. I worked from home as a freelance illustrator, a job that suited my introverted nature perfectly. My routine was my fortress. I'd wake up, make coffee, sit at my drafting table by the large window overlooking the street, and draw until the light faded. My interactions were minimal, my days measured in brush strokes and the soft scratch of pencil on paper. It was a peaceful life, but a solitary one. I was 27, and while I wasn't unhappy, a quiet, persistent loneliness hummed just beneath the surface of my contentment. The building was old, one of those pre-war walk-ups with thick walls, high ceilings, and floors that groaned with stories. It had character, which was a polite way of saying it was constantly in some state of gentle decay. My apartment was my sanctuary, filled with books, art supplies, and the scent of turpentine and old paper. From my window, I had a perfect view of the apartment building across the street, and a slightly askew, partial view of my own building's front stoop. It was from this perch that I first saw him. He moved into 4B, the apartment directly across the hall from mine, on a sweltering Saturday in July. The door was propped open, and the sounds of heavy lifting and gruff, friendly chatter spilled into the hallway. I caught glimpses of him through my peephole, a voyeur in my own home. He was tall, with broad shoulders and arms defined by the kind of lean, functional muscle that comes from real work, not a gym. His hair was a dark, unruly mess, perpetually looking like he'd just run his hands through it. His name, I learned from a stray piece of mail mistakenly slipped under my door, was Caleb. Over the next few weeks, our interactions were limited to the brief, neighborly nods and tight-lipped smiles exchanged in the hallway. He worked in construction or renovation, I gathered, leaving early in dusty work boots and returning late, smelling of sawdust and sweat. He seemed so grounded, so effortlessly masculine in a way that felt like a different language from my own quiet, indoor existence. In my mind, I cataloged him as an impossibly attractive, impossibly straight neighbor, a nice piece of scenery, but ultimately, part of a world separate from mine. He was the sun-drenched outdoors. I was the shaded, quiet interior. I'd sometimes hear the low rumble of his television through the wall or the muffled sound of a phone call. Each noise was a small reminder of the life happening just a few feet from my own, a life I could only imagine. He had friends over some weekends, and the sound of their laughter would drift under my door, making my quiet apartment feel even quieter. I constructed an entire life for him in my head, complete with a girlfriend, a love for sports, and a complete unawareness of his neighbor who was slowly, foolishly, becoming captivated by him. That's how it was for weeks. A routine of quiet observation from a safe, emotional distance. Then came the Tuesday that changed everything. It started with a frantic knocking on my door, sharp and insistent, completely unlike the usual gentle thumps of package deliveries. I froze, my pencil hovering over an illustration. My heart gave a nervous little kick. People didn't knock on my door. I peered through the peephole, and the distorted, wide-angle view showed Caleb, his hair wet and plastered to his forehead, looking stressed and panicked. I opened the door a few inches, my rusty social skills groaning in protest. "Everything okay?" He looked past me, into my apartment, with a desperate energy that was startling. "Hey man, Miles, right? I am so sorry to bother you. But I have a huge problem." He gestured helplessly back toward his own apartment. "My hot water heater, I think it just exploded. There's water everywhere, and the super isn't answering. And," he let out a frustrated sigh, "I have to be at a wedding in an hour. I'm a groomsman." He looked genuinely distressed, a crack in the confident, self-assured facade I had built for him. His t-shirt was splotched with water, and he was holding a towel that was already soaked through. An emergency. A disruption. The neat, orderly lines of my day suddenly blurred. "Oh wow, that's bad." I managed, my voice sounding thin. "Bad is an understatement," he said, giving a short, humorless laugh. "Look, this is a massive imposition, I know, But is there any chance I could use your shower? I'll be in and out in 10 minutes, I swear. I'm desperate. The request hung in the air between us, charged and strange. My apartment, my private, meticulously controlled space, was about to be breached. My mind raced through 100 reasons to say no. The awkwardness, the intrusion, the sheer vulnerability of it. But looking at his face, the genuine panic in his eyes, I couldn't. It was a simple request born of a real crisis. How could I refuse? Yeah, I heard myself say, the word feeling foreign in my mouth. Yeah, of course. Come on in. A wave of relief washed over his features. Thank you. Seriously. You are a lifesaver. He stepped inside, and my small entryway suddenly felt crowded, charged with his presence. He smelled of damp plaster and something uniquely him, a clean, masculine scent that was now mingling with the familiar smell of my own home. He brought the crisis in with him, and my quiet world tilted on its axis. I led him toward the bathroom, my heart thumping a nervous rhythm against my ribs. It's, right here, I said, pointing to the closed door. Towels are in the little cabinet over the toilet. Help yourself to anything you need. My own words sounded distant, as if someone else were speaking them. Thanks, man. I owe you big time, he said, giving me a quick, grateful smile before disappearing into the bathroom. The lock clicked shut, and I was left standing in my own living room, my mind reeling. The quiet of my apartment was now punctuated by a new sound, the rush of my shower, being used by the man from across the hall. I retreated to my kitchen, not knowing what to do with myself. I couldn't work. I couldn't read. I just stood there, leaning against the counter, listening. The sound of the water, a mundane, everyday noise, was suddenly loaded with significance. He was in there, in my most private space. The thought sent a strange, anxious thrill through me. I was acutely aware of my own rumpled t-shirt and worn sweatpants. I felt unprepared, exposed in my own home. The air began to grow humid, the steam from the shower escaping from under the bathroom door and carrying with it the scent of my own soap and shampoo. It was a bizarrely intimate thing, to have someone using your soap, to imagine them standing under the same spray of water you stood under every morning. I felt a blush creep up my neck. My perception of him was shifting rapidly from a distant, idealized figure to a real, tangible person who was currently naked 20 feet away from me. I tried to busy myself, wiping down a counter that was already clean, rearranging the salt and pepper shakers. Anything to distract from the loud thumping of my own heart. The water shut off, and the sudden silence was even more jarring than the noise had been. I heard the rustle of a towel, the squeak of the cabinet door. My anxiety spiked. What was the protocol for this? Did I wait for him to come out? Did I offer him a drink? My life of solitude hadn't prepared me for this kind of spontaneous, close-quarters interaction. The bathroom door opened, and he emerged, a cloud of steam billowing out behind him. He had one of my navy blue towels wrapped low around his hips, and his hair was slicked back, dripping onto his broad shoulders. Drops of water traced paths through the dark hair on his chest. It was a sight so unexpectedly domestic and overwhelmingly attractive that I felt the air leave my lungs. I had spent weeks observing him from a distance, and now here he was, half naked in my living room, looking like some kind of classical statue brought to life. "Feel much better," he said, his voice a low rumble. He ran a hand through his wet hair, looking around my apartment with open curiosity for the first time. His eyes scanned my bookshelves, the prints on the walls, and finally landed on my drafting table by the window, where my current project was laid out. "Wow, is this your work?" I nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride and shyness. "Yeah, I'm an illustrator." "No kidding?" "This is incredible," he said, taking a step closer to the desk, seemingly unconcerned about the fact that he was wearing nothing but a towel. He leaned in, studying a detailed pen-and-ink drawing of a mythical forest. "The detail is insane. You're really talented." "Thanks," I mumbled, my throat suddenly dry. The compliment, coming from him, felt disproportionately significant. It was as if he were seeing a part of me that I usually kept hidden, and he wasn't just seeing it, he was appreciating it. He straightened up and turned back to me, a more subdued expression on his face. "So, this wedding," he began, his voice taking on a different tone. "It's for my ex-girlfriend." The admission caught me completely off guard. "Oh," was all I could manage. It was an unexpected crack in his confident veneer, a sudden offering of personal information that felt weighty and significant. He gave a wry, self-deprecating smile. Yeah, we were together for 5 years. We broke up about a year ago. Friendly, you know? Friendly enough that she still wanted me to be a groomsman. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to clear it. It's just weird, seeing her marry someone else. You think you're over it, and then you're standing there in a rented tux, watching it happen. In that moment, he wasn't the impossibly confident man from across the hall anymore. He was just a guy, standing in my apartment in a towel, nursing a quiet heartache. He was vulnerable. It was a side of him I never would have guessed existed, and it resonated with the lonely part of me in a way that was powerful and immediate. My attraction to him, which had been a kind of abstract, aesthetic appreciation, suddenly deepened into something more tangible, more empathetic. It was the beginning of a connection, forged in the steam of my shower and the shared, unspoken understanding of human fragility. He stood there for a moment, lost in thought, a droplet of water tracing a slow path down his temple. I noticed he was unconsciously fiddling with a small, carved wooden bird that sat on the edge of my desk, a little trinket I'd had since I was a kid. His fingers traced its smooth shape gently, carefully. It was such a small thing, but it felt monumental. He wasn't just occupying my space. He was interacting with it, touching a piece of my history without even realizing it. The distance between our two worlds was shrinking with every passing second. He seemed to snap back to the present, realizing he was still just in a towel. Right. I should, get dressed. Don't want to be late. He quickly retreated back into the bathroom, leaving me alone again with the echo of his confession and the lingering humidity in the air. When he came out a few minutes later, he was transformed into a handsome stranger in a crisp suit, his hair neatly combed. The confident armor was back in place, but now I knew what was underneath. I can't thank you enough, Miles, he said, his voice sincere. For the shower, and for, listening. Any time, I said, and I meant it. He gave me a final, lingering look, a look that felt different from our previous hallway encounters. There was a warmth in it now, a flicker of recognition. I'll see you around, he said, and then he was gone, the click of my apartment door sealing me back into my quiet world. But it wasn't the same. The silence was different now. It was filled with the memory of his presence, the scent of my soap on his skin, and the startling, hopeful possibility that this was not an end, but a beginning. The plumbing situation in Caleb's apartment turned out to be more complicated than a simple burst pipe. It required tearing into the wall, replacing old copper, and dealing with the building's ancient infrastructure. This meant that for the next week and a half, the "can I borrow your shower?" routine became a strange but accepted part of our days. Sometimes it was early in the morning before he left for work. Other times it was late at night when he got back, covered in dust and grime. Each time, it was a little less awkward, a little more familiar. He'd knock, I'd let him in, and we'd fall into a comfortable pattern of conversation. I learned more about him in those brief 10 to 15-minute intervals than I had in months of silent observation. I learned he was a carpenter, specializing in custom cabinetry. I learned he had 2 younger sisters and a dog he'd had to leave with his parents when he moved to the city. I learned he liked old jazz music and had a surprisingly deep knowledge of classic films, something we discovered we had in common. He, in turn, learned about me. He'd always ask what I was working on, peering over my shoulder at the fantasy landscapes and strange creatures taking shape on my paper. He never feigned interest. He seemed genuinely fascinated by my world, a world so different from his own. He started pointing out details, asking about my process, about the stories behind the images. He saw me, really saw me, in a way that few people ever had. My apartment became a sort of neutral ground, a liminal space between our 2 separate lives. The scent of his shower gel, he'd bought his own after the second time, leaving it neatly in the corner of my tub, mingled with the smell of my paints. His damp towels would be draped over my shower rod next to my dry ones. It was a strange, temporary form of cohabitation, and it was rewiring my entire emotional landscape. My quiet loneliness was being replaced by a humming anticipation, a low-grade, constant awareness of him. The hope was a dangerous, fragile thing. I'd find myself listening for the sound of his keys in the hallway, my heart giving a little jump. I'd replay our conversations in my head, dissecting every word, every look. Was his smile just friendly, or was there something more behind it? When his hand brushed mine as I passed him a towel, was it an accident, or did he let it linger for a fraction of a second too long? I was caught in a cycle of hope and anxiety, terrified of misreading the signals, but unable to stop myself from searching for them. One evening, he came over later than usual. He looked utterly exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and a weary slump to his shoulders. He'd had a difficult day on site, a cabinet installation gone wrong, and he just needed to wash the frustration away. I offered him a beer while the water heated up, and he accepted, sinking onto my sofa with a grateful sigh. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sounds the hiss of the pipes and the clink of his bottle against my coffee table. He looked around the room, his gaze soft. "You know," he said quietly, "I like your apartment. It's calm. It feels like you." My heart did a slow, painful flip. "Thanks," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "It's my bubble." "It's a good bubble," he replied, his eyes meeting mine. There was an intensity in his gaze that I hadn't seen before, a depth that seemed to pull me in. The space between us felt charged, filled with everything we hadn't said over the past week. The air grew thick, and I could hear nothing but the frantic beat of my own pulse. The shower was ready, the steam beginning to fog the windows, but neither of us moved. This was it. This felt like a turning point. A precipice. The casual, friendly routine we had built was about to fall away, and I had no idea what would be left in its place. Fear and a wild, soaring hope warred within me. I just held his gaze, waiting, forgetting how to breathe. The moment stretched on, fragile and electric. Caleb didn't move from the sofa, and I remained frozen by the counter, both of us caught in the gravity of that shared look. The hiss of the shower in the background was a constant reminder of the pretense, the simple excuse that had brought us here night after night. But it wasn't about the shower anymore, and we both knew it. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice low and a little rough. "The thing is," he started, his eyes dropping to the beer bottle in his hands. "They finished the plumbing in my place this morning. The water's been on all day." The confession landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. I felt my breath catch in my throat. He hadn't needed to be here tonight. He had come over anyway. My mind scrambled to process the implication, the sheer weight of that admission. Every hope I had secretly harbored, every question I had agonized over, suddenly coalesced into a single, terrifying, exhilarating point. He looked up at me then, his expression a mixture of vulnerability and resolve. It was the same look he'd had that first day when he'd told me about his ex-girlfriend, but this time it was directed at me. It was for me. I wanted an excuse to see you, Miles. He stood up slowly and walked toward the bathroom, not breaking eye contact. He stopped at the threshold, the steam coiling around him like a halo. He disappeared inside for only a second, and when he called my name, his voice was muffled but clear. "Miles." My feet felt rooted to the floor. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Going to that door felt like stepping off a cliff. But I knew I had to. I walked across the living room, each footstep deafening in the sudden silence of my own mind. I stopped just outside the open bathroom door. He was standing there, having already shed his shirt. He was lit by the single dim bulb above the mirror, his skin slick with the humidity, his chest rising and falling with what looked like a nervous breath. He wasn't the confident carpenter or the casual neighbor. He was just Caleb, looking at me with an expression of such raw, open wanting that it mirrored everything I was feeling inside. "You never answered," he said, his voice quiet. "Is it okay that I'm here?" I couldn't form words. I could only nod, a single, jerky motion. A small, relieved smile touched his lips. He reached out, his hand hovering in the space between us for a heart-stopping second before his fingers gently brushed against my cheek. His touch was electric, a jolt of warmth that shot through my entire body. "Good," he whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him. I didn't. I couldn't. I met him halfway, my eyes fluttering shut as his lips met mine. The kiss was tentative at first, questioning. It was soft and searching, a silent conversation. It tasted of beer and anxiety and a profound, shared relief. His hand moved from my cheek to the back of my neck, his fingers tangling in my hair, pulling me closer until my chest was pressed against his. The kiss deepened, losing its hesitation and finding a sure, steady rhythm. It was a kiss that spoke of weeks of unspoken attraction, of stolen glances and hallway smiles, of a connection forged over borrowed towels and late-night conversations. He pulled back just enough to rest his forehead against mine, his breath warm on my skin. "I've wanted to do that since the day I first saw you through your window," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "You were drawing, and the sun was hitting your hair. You looked like you were in your own world, and I just wanted to be in it with you." I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "I thought you were. I don't know. I thought you'd never even see me." "I saw you," he murmured, his thumb stroking my jaw. "You were all I saw." He kissed me again, a deep, possessive kiss that left no room for doubt. Then he pulled me gently by the hand, leading me past the threshold and into the small, steam-filled room. He reached behind me and pushed the door closed, encasing us in our own private, humid world. The pretense of the shower had led us to this, a moment of real, breathtaking intimacy. The water was still running, a steady, soothing sound that became the soundtrack to the beginning of everything. The next morning felt surreal. I woke up in my own bed, the sheets tangled around me, the pillow next to mine indented from where Caleb's head had been. The apartment was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was filled with the ghost of him, the lingering scent of his skin, the memory of his warmth beside me. He had left before I woke up, leaving only a hastily scrawled note on my kitchen counter. "Had to get to the site early. Coffee's on you next time," and his name, Caleb. I stood there in my kitchen, the slip of paper in my hand, my mind a chaotic whirl of emotions. Last night had felt like a dream, a fantasy I'd played out in my head 1,000 times, finally made real. The steam-filled bathroom, the raw honesty of his confession, the weight of his body next to mine in the dark, it was all so vivid, so perfect. But in the harsh light of morning, a cold dread began to seep in. Was that it? Was it just a moment of curiosity for him? A one-time thing driven by a confusing mix of alcohol and vulnerability? The note was friendly, casual. Too casual? My brain, so skilled at creating fantasy worlds on paper, was now working overtime to construct 100 different scenarios, most of them ending in my own heartbreak. The high of last night was quickly being replaced by the crushing anxiety of the unknown. I replayed every moment, every word, every touch. I dissected the note. "Coffee's on you next time." That implied a next time, right? But it was so vague. It could mean anything. It could mean a friendly, neighborly coffee to smooth over the awkwardness of what had happened. My hope and fear were locked in a vicious battle, and fear was winning. I felt fragile, exposed. I had let him into my apartment, into my bed, into my carefully guarded heart, and now I was left alone with the terrifying uncertainty of what came next. I tried to work, but I couldn't focus. The lines on my paper looked like meaningless squiggles. My own sanctuary, my apartment, now felt like a waiting room. Every creak of the floorboards in the hallway, every distant siren, made my head snap up, my heart leaping into my throat. I checked my phone every 5 minutes, my thumb hovering over his contact information, which I'd nervously added the night before. Should I text him? What would I even say? "Hey, about last night," felt too loaded. "Hope you have a good day," felt too detached. The silence from his end stretched on through the morning and into the afternoon, each passing hour amplifying my anxiety. The joy of our connection was being eclipsed by the terror of rejection. Maybe I had misread everything. Maybe for him, it was just a physical release, an experiment. The thought was a cold stone in my stomach. The vulnerability I had felt with him, which had been so exhilarating in the moment, now just felt like recklessness. Just after 5 o'clock, my phone buzzed on the table, the sound so loud in the quiet room it made me jump. It was him. My hands trembled as I picked it up. The message was short, just 3 words. "Can we talk?" My blood ran cold. "Can we talk?" Those were the words that preceded a breakup, an apology, a gentle letdown. It wasn't "can't wait to see you," or "thinking about you." It was clinical. Official. This was it. This was the end. My soaring hope from the night before plummeted, crashing and burning. I spent the next 20 minutes composing and deleting replies, my mind a frantic mess, before finally typing back a single, pathetic-sounding word. "Okay," he replied instantly. "I'll be at your door in 5." The next 5 minutes were the longest of my life. I paced my small living room, my heart hammering against my ribs. I felt sick. I considered not answering the door, pretending I wasn't home. I considered packing a bag and leaving town forever. I was spiraling, caught in a vortex of my own worst fears. The calm, controlled world I had lived in before Caleb had been shattered, and I didn't know if I could piece it back together if this ended badly. When the knock finally came, soft and hesitant this time, I felt a wave of pure dread wash over me. I took a deep, shaky breath and walked to the door, preparing myself for the worst. I opened the door, my hand slick with sweat on the knob. Caleb stood there, still in his work clothes, a fine layer of sawdust clinging to his jeans. He wasn't smiling. He looked just as nervous as I felt, his jaw tight, his eyes clouded with an emotion I couldn't read. The confident, easygoing man from our shower-borrowing encounters was gone, replaced by someone who looked deeply uncertain. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet. "Hey," I replied, my own voice barely audible. I stepped back, letting him in. He walked into the center of the living room and stood there awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. The silence was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the easy intimacy of the night before. He took a deep breath, like a man about to dive into cold water. "Look, Miles," he started, and my stomach clenched. "I'm so sorry about this morning. About just leaving a note. And for the text. I've been a mess all day trying to figure out how to say this." This was it. The apology. The letdown. I braced myself, my gaze fixed on a spot on the floor. "It's fine," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "No, it's not fine," he insisted, taking a step closer. I finally forced myself to look at him, and what I saw in his eyes wasn't pity or regret. It was fear. He was just as scared as I was. "I've handled this all wrong. I've been handling everything wrong." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "The truth is, I've never done that before. Been with a guy." The confession hung in the air, confirming one of my deepest fears. "I was an experiment. But this isn't about that. Not really. This is about you." He met my eyes, his own wide and earnest. "I told you I noticed you through the window, and that was true. But it was more than that. I found excuses to be in the hallway when I thought you might be coming or going. I replayed our stupid little hellos in my head. I was completely, totally hung up on you from day one, and it terrified me because it was new and I had no idea what I was doing." He let out a short, frustrated breath. "When my water heater broke, it felt like some kind of sign from the universe. Like a free shot. So I took it. And coming over here, talking to you, seeing your art, getting to know you, it just made everything I was feeling 100 times stronger. So I kept coming back, using the broken plumbing as an excuse because I was too much of a coward to just ask you out." My heart, which I thought had stopped, began to beat again, slow and heavy. I was listening, but it barely felt real. "Last night," he continued, his voice dropping, becoming softer, "was one of the best nights of my life. And that scared me even more. I woke up this morning and saw you sleeping, and I just panicked. I felt like I was in way over my head, so I ran. And I've regretted it every single second since. I'm not sorry about what happened, Miles. I'm sorry for how I acted afterward. For making you feel uncertain. For making you doubt." He took another step, closing the distance between us until he was standing right in front of me. He gently took my hand, his calloused palm warm and steady around mine. "What I came here to say is that I'm crazy about you. And I know I'm a mess, and I'm still figuring things out, but I want to figure them out with you. If you'll let me." The relief that washed over me was so total, so absolute, it felt like I could dissolve into it. The tension drained out of my body, leaving me weak-kneed. I let out a shaky laugh, a sound that was half sob. "I thought you were here to end it." I confessed, my voice thick. A look of pain crossed his face. "No. God, no, Miles. I'm here to begin it. All the anxiety, all the fear, all the hours of agonizing just melted away, replaced by a profound, radiant clarity. I had been so lost in my own head, so convinced of the worst, that I hadn't allowed myself to believe that he could possibly feel the same way I did. But he did." I squeezed his hand. "I'm crazy about you, too," I said, and the words were the truest I had ever spoken. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Caleb's face, transforming him back into the man I had first been drawn to, but now his smile was just for me. He lifted his other hand to cup my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. "Yeah," he asked, his voice full of wonder. "Yeah," I confirmed. He leaned in and kissed me, and this kiss was nothing like the ones from the night before. It wasn't tentative or searching, and it wasn't frantic or desperate. This kiss was confident. It was sure. It was a promise. It happened not in the dark or in a cloud of steam, but right there in the clear, honest light of my living room. A mutual acknowledgement that our two separate worlds had finally, irrevocably, merged into one. In the weeks that followed, my life rearranged itself in beautiful, unexpected ways. The quiet solitude I had once cherished was replaced by the easy, comfortable presence of Caleb. My apartment, once just my sanctuary, became our sanctuary. The line between 4A and 4B blurred until it practically disappeared. Most nights were spent together, either at my place, where he would watch me draw, offering quiet encouragement, or at his, where we'd watch old movies on his comfortable, worn-in sofa. We were learning each other's rhythms. I learned that he hummed, slightly off-key, when he was concentrating on fixing something. He learned that I needed a full hour of quiet with my coffee in the morning before I was truly human. We went on dates, to museums he'd never been to hole-in-the-wall restaurants I'd always been too nervous to try alone. We took a long walk in the park one sunny Saturday, and I watched him laugh with such uninhibited joy at a dog chasing a squirrel that my heart felt like it might actually burst. It was a time of gentle discovery, of peeling back layers. I saw the deep thoughtfulness beneath his rugged exterior, and he saw the quiet strength beneath my reserved one. He wasn't an experiment or a phase. He was just Caleb, and I was just Miles. And together, we were building something real, something sturdy, one shared laugh and late-night conversation at a time. The fear and anxiety that had plagued me in the beginning slowly faded, replaced by a steady, grounding sense of peace. I was no longer observing life from my window. I was living it. About 2 months after that first frantic knock on my door, I was working at my desk when Caleb came in. He was holding a wrench and had a determined look on his face. "Okay," he announced. "I cannot listen to that dripping sound for one more second." My shower head had developed a slow, rhythmic drip a few days earlier, a tiny flaw in our shared domestic bliss. I had gotten used to it, but it clearly drove him crazy. I watched, smiling, as he disappeared into the bathroom. I heard the clank of metal, a frustrated grunt, and then a triumphant, "Aha!" He emerged a minute later, wiping his hands on his jeans, looking inordinately proud of himself. "All fixed," he said, puffing out his chest in mock bravado. He came over to my desk and leaned down, wrapping his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder to look at the illustration I was coloring. "What's this one for?" "Just a personal piece," I said, leaning my head back against his chest. It was a drawing of 2 astronauts from different ships, their helmets touching in the vast emptiness of space, a single tether connecting them. He was quiet for a moment, studying the image. "I get it," he said softly, his voice a low rumble against my back. He pressed a kiss to my temple, his lips warm against my skin. That was us, floating in our own little worlds, right across the hall from each other. I turned my head to look at him, my heart swelling with an emotion so big it felt like it filled the entire room. And then a pipe broke, I said, smiling. "Thank God for bad plumbing." He laughed, his eyes crinkling at the corners. In that simple, easy moment, surrounded by the smell of my paints and the quiet comfort of our shared life, I felt a sense of profound rightness. Everything had led to this. Every lonely night, every hallway glance, every borrowed towel. Life is so beautifully unpredictable. You can build walls around your heart, design a life of perfect, quiet routine, and think you have it all figured out. You can convince yourself that certain kinds of happiness are for other people, that your world is destined to be small. And then, one day, someone knocks on your door with a crisis that turns out to be an invitation. They don't just borrow a towel. They pull you out of the life you thought you knew and into the one that was waiting for you all along. You just have to be brave enough to open the door.